Joining me now, Ned Price, former CIA intelligence officer.
Former CIA director.
The former director of national intelligence.
He's a former deputy director of the CIA.
And retired U.S. Navy Admiral James Stavridis. Good morning to all of you.
With the rise of cable news networks in the mid-90s, there was a mad scramble to get as many expert commentators as possible. The higher ranked, the better. The more medals, the better. The fancier title, the better.
They go out and look for former officials.
Colonel Jack Jacobs.
John McLaughlin.
General officers, former CIA directors, former deputy directors.
General Michael Hayden. John Brennan.
Michael Morrell.
And to the networks, they feel this is an authoritative point of view.
It's a chilling statement from someone who knows the things you know.
That's authenticity to them. That's credibility to them.
I know you're very plugged into the intelligence community.
This is a revolving door between folks who were officials in our national security apparatus.
You sense this when you walk the halls of the Hoover building, as I did.
Who then have moved out of that role and are now leveraging their experience to get media gigs.
Sir, you served under the Bush and Obama administrations.
Titles that they gained during their time in public service have a lot of gravitas and credibility with the public.
Every year, the polling company Gallup measures the trust Americans have in various institutions. Last year, it found that only 12% of the US public had confidence in Congress, and just 24% trusted the news delivered on TV. However, 72% said they still had confidence in the US military. Respect for ex-military and former intelligence officials persists despite the many occasions when their information and assessments have been proven wrong, or worse, false.
Being one of these former military officials, TV pundits, means never having to say you're sorry. These people have gotten it wrong repeatedly, and they're on the air forever.
And General Barry McCaffrey joins me now.
On the 15th anniversary of the invasion of Iraq, I'm watching Chris Hayes interviewing Barry McCaffrey, and Hayes didn't say, hey, 15 years ago you were on the same channel and everything you said about why we had to invade Iraq was wrong. John McLaughlin.
John McLaughlin is former acting director of the CIA.
He's a regular on MSNBC. He was involved in giving the phony intelligence to the White House that led to the invasion of Iraq. He's involved in torture.
After all, the president-elect did say some pretty nasty things about the CIA.
Now he's a moral figure weighing in on Trump.
Well, joining me now is the former director of national intelligence, James Clapper.
With James Clapper, here's a person who literally perjured himself in front of Congress talking about mass surveillance on the U.S. public. He also has said on TV before that Russians
typically almost genetically driven
to be devious and sinister and meddling in world affairs. Obviously, that sort of DNA he doesn't believe is inherent to Americans, of course, let alone the fact that his entire job was about gathering intelligence on foreign nations.
Add to the list Mike Morrell, who, during his tenure as former CIA deputy director, oversaw torture. He now uses his media platform to justify it. And former director of the NSA, Michael Hayden. He headed the digital spy agency while it wiretapped millions of US citizens without a warrant. News networks appear to have remarkably short memories, providing platforms for men like these despite their tarnished records. What's more, they seem frighteningly unconcerned with the interests and organizations these figures represent right now, who they're working for, and, in effect, lobbying for on the air.
Mike Morrell, former acting director of the CIA, you see him on CBS all the time.
Those people operated under the president's direction with the approval of the attorney general, who said this is legal, it wasn't torture.
He's in this group called the Alliance for Securing Democracy, which is a mesh of the Obama-Clinton foreign policy leadership with the neoconservatives that got us into the invasion of Iraq and started this whole mess.
Joining us now is General Michael Hayden, former director of the CIA and NSA under President George W. Bush.
Michael Hayden. He is now a principal at the Chertoff Group, which is a strategic advisory firm to the defense industry. They advise companies on how to get contracts with the U.S. government, among other things.
Former CIA Director John Brennan, who is now an NBC News senior national security and intelligence analyst.
John Brennan, who's very recently the CIA director under President Obama, now a paid contributor for NBC, and is an advisor to a cybersecurity firm.
Vladimir Putin was the person who authorized the interference in our election.
Media has a responsibility to viewers to make sure that they know where this commentary is coming from, and so far I've just done a very poor job.
Unless you happen to be watching Fox News, these pro-security pundits are almost universally anti-President Trump. That helps them, the agencies they used to work for, and the networks to present themselves as the responsible resistance to the White House. But where these former military, security and intelligence personnel agree with Trump's policies tells us a lot about where their resistance ends and their ideology begins. Take strikes on Syria, for example, or Trump's choice of Gina Haspel as incoming director of the CIA.
You saw a parade on cable news of former CIA officials talking about how great at her job she was. Remember, she oversaw torture and is part of the exact same military intelligence complex that has been doing rendition, torturing people.
All of the networks rely on former CIA officials, former directors, Leon Panetta, John Brennan, former deputy directors, Mike Morrell, former executive assistants like Jeremy Bash, and every one of them has supported Haspel. Just the other day, 109 generals and admirals issued a strong statement against confirming Gina Haspel. Why aren't they appearing on television in great numbers?
General Marks, what advantage does adding aircraft into the mix give you?
When it comes to strikes on Syria, we see the same thing. Former military officials talking about how efficient and how effective the military is. These are people talking about a sector that they respect and they will always respect.
But it increases the capabilities of multiple attack angles going against targets in Syria.
So therefore, war crimes are never talked about. Civilian casualties are never talked about.
15 years ago, manipulated intelligence and a complicit media helped justify the invasion of Iraq. As the Iraq War became a catastrophe and spawned ISIS, media talked up terrorism as global threat number one. Now, it's Russia. Audiences appear to have learned their lesson. Since 2003, trust in TV news has hit all-time lows. And yet today, the same news channels and many of the same contributors are on a war footing once again.
The only thing that's changed is it's gotten a little more intense because CNN and MSNBC, the allegedly liberal channels, think that by bringing on these former military and intelligence brass, that's the way to show up Trump. When you allow the military brass to come on night after night and never have to debate, it normalizes what we call the military-industrial complex, and I would call it a military-industrial media complex.